first thing to do for the tiered caftan dress is to sew the front bodice. So I've got my two front pieces here. I'm going to put them right sides together, and there is a notch over here, and we are going to sew from here down. So just pin along this edge, and then we're going to stitch from our notch here down this edge with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Once you sew this seam, we're going to open it up. So this is our center and our side seam and shoulder seam. You can see here, there's a notch. I'm just going to pin that so it's easier to see for you. So this is where, above this is the armhole area, and this is the side seams. We're going to take our back piece. I found the notch here and match that up. There's a notch right there. So this is our side seam. So from here down is the side seam. And up here we have the shoulder seam. So we will sew along those edges with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And just remember, we need to keep this open because that is the armhole. So just sew along here and do the same on the other side. Once you have your shoulder seams and side seams sewn, we're going to sew the center back. So we've got notches here. I just marked those with pins to make it easy. And then we will match those and sew from the notch down. We'll leave this open because that's your neck hole. Serge or bind your seams. Once you have serged or finished the back seam on the bodice, we're going to do the skirt unless you are just doing a bodice, in which case you can skip ahead over this step here. So this fabric's what I'm using for the skirt. So we're going to run a gathering stitch along the top edge. I actually like to run 2 gathering stitches. So a gathering stitch is really just the longest stitch length on your machine. If it has numbers, it's usually a 4. 2 rows of stitching. I'm going to do it 1/4 of an inch in and about 1/2 an inch in. Just 2 rows of long stitching. Once your gathering stitch is in place on both pieces, put it right sides together and sew along the side seams. Serge or bind your seams. Now that we've sewn the skirt together, I've also serged the edges of the skirt and the side seam of the bodice. We're going to pull the bobbin threads to gather it in, pull a little bit on both sides, and it needs to match the bottom of the bodice. Once it's gathered into about the right sides, you want to match it to the bodice, right sides together. Match up your side seams of the skirt and bodice together first, and then gather it in so it's nice and evenly gathered all the way around. Stitch the skirt in place with a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. Then serge your seam. Take your basting stitches out. They should just come out pretty easily like that. To make the ruffle, we'll make this almost the same as the skirt. So gathering stitches along the top edges of the 2 pieces and then seam them together along the sides. Once we've sewn our gathering stitches on the bottom ruffle, we're going to put it on the skirt. This ruffle is so big, I'm going to show you a trick to make it a little bit easier to attach the ruffle. I'm going to mark, basically 1/4 it. So what you do is you mark the side seams are like that. Match up the side seams. And then over here, you want to find the 1/4 point, mark it with a pin. And then when you sew it to the skirt, we'll match the side seams and side seams. And we'll match the halfway point of the ruffle to the skirt. And here, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to match up my side seams So right sides together. I'm going to pin this in place here. Match up these two pins. So this is like the center front. This is the center back. Then I'll pin at the side seams. Now that we've got it pinned at the center front and back, and the side seams are matching the side seams, now we can gather. Stitch the ruffle on with a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around, and then serge or bind the seam. Now that the bottom ruffle is sewn on and serged, we're just going to do the hem. So we're just going to do a little double turn hem like that, about 1/4 inch, and pin it down and stitch it. Serge the armholes and the neckline. Once you've serged the armhole and neckline area, we're just going to fold it in about 1/2 inch and top stitch it all the way around on both armholes and the neck. To make the belt, cut a long strip of fabric as long as you need the belt to be. I cut mine 5 inches wide, and then I folded it in half and stitched along the edge. Take a tube turner and flip it inside out. Once you have flipped your tube the right way out, we're just going to fold the edge in and top stitch here. Once you've top stitched the ends, give it a press and press the whole thing all the way down, and you're done your belt.